everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Marie-Therese Rossi. I'm the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, and this is the second time we have used the chamber of the Town Hall to have a meeting. As of now, we are told by law we have to have meetings in person. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, so councillors who are unable to attend or members of the public can follow it that way. To keep everyone safe, I'm afraid I would ask everyone to keep their masks on unless they are speaking, and then take them off and then put them back on again. So at the top here are the chairs of the select committees. Other members of the committees are sitting down there, and to my left, I think that is, we've got the Chief Executive, the lead member for Finance, and Mr. David Hughes. And over here we have Jackie and Martin Carver from Governance. So I'm asked also to tell people not to huddle and chat after the meeting. So I would like to welcome everyone in the chamber and also everyone on YouTube. And I think it would be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy, and to remember that on Monday it is the 4th anniversary of that event. Thank you. Thank you. Before we start the meeting, I'd ask members of the committee to only switch your microphones on when you are called to speak, and then turn them off afterwards, and also to remain seated when you are called to speak, not to stand up. If any councillor wants to speak and I haven't called them, please raise your hand so that I notice. And there are no members of the public, so we'll move on from that. The membership of the OSC and the Chair and Vice Chair were approved by the annual general meeting on the 26th of May, and are set out on the agenda page. Sarah Adambrook has given her apologies tonight, but I would like to welcome her to the committee, and also Mo Bakhtiar. It is his first committee meeting as a member of OSC. And I would also like to thank Pat Mason and Max Chalman for the contribution that they have made in the past. So apologies for absence, Sarah Adambrook and Adrian Bell-Cox, who is shielding. Do any members have any interest to declare? Okay. So we are going now first to A4, which is the main report for the evening, which is the Kroll report, which looks at the transactions around the way this council dealt with some of its property in the past, including the Isaac Newton Professional Development Centre, the North Kensington Library, the Westway Information Centre, and the college at Warnington, the Kensington College. at Warnington Road. So I think I will call Barry Quirk to introduce the report, and then I will ask Mary Will to speak, and then I might actually say a few words about it myself. But first, Barry, if you would like to, other way round, as it suits you.
That's very kind of you, Madam Chairman. Thank you. So, as we've discussed, the Kroll report was commissioned to examine 4 separate property transactions, and it was commissioned from a company trusted by the community, and as a council we have publicly welcomed the findings. And what's made clear by the Kroll report is that despite no evidence of wrongdoing, the council was at times too commercial, and we should have paid more attention to our community's wants and needs. As the leader said at the time this report was published, no wrongdoing does not mean that you were doing everything right. And I thoroughly endorse that sentiment. And as a result of the fire, we have committed to change, and I would like to outline some of those changes now. The Council's working towards a social investment strategy, and the framework of that was approved yesterday at the leadership team meeting. And this aims to redefine how the Council examines best value, integrating economic, environmental and social issues into the way that we use and let properties, the way we procure goods and run services. But in advance of the strategy being finalised, we have already made what I think are some positive steps and improvements. So our new procurement strategy, for example, which I think was approved last year, contains provisions for extracting social value when we tender for services. For example, we've integrated clauses for entry-level work opportunities in our largest contract, the waste contract, which we've just relet. We've also adopted the living wage across all council contracts, and we've achieved some success in co-designing the way we use some of those community assets, including some mentioned in the Kroll report. And having a strategy in future will help us to take a more coherent approach. We still have a statutory duty as a local authority to achieve best value, and we still need to raise income to fund local services. And just to give you an idea of the continued relevance of this, in 2011, 13% of the council's budget was funded by income raised, not just property income, but all income raised, but this figure was 41% by 2020. In the same period, our central government funding fell 90%. And those who managed to tune into the medium-term financial strategy discussion as well last night will know that we have a £28.5 million worth of savings to find in the course of the next 3 years. So there needs to be, the reason I mention all of this is that there needs to be a careful, well-scrutinised balancing act involving the community in decisions, extracting the maximum social value from transactions, as well as maintaining income streams to continue to provide excellent services. And as we rebalance, our new Communities Department will play a vital role in ensuring that we listen to residents effectively. And I think we've made solid progress in building our capacity to do this, from the Maxilla Bays we own to Warnington College to the library. We've listened to our communities and we're acting on what they tell us. A social value strategy will help us to act consistently, act transparently and act fairly in this very difficult and challenging but rewarding balancing act. So I'd now like to pass over to Barry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me return to the triggering events for the need for this independent examination. And really I think it was, although we chose these 4 property transactions, the trigger event really was the investigation by Kroll into the purchase, or rather the sale of the Mornington College facility to the council, which was then going to reconfigure, reshape, retain some further education facilities there, but also to have there to be some income from property that was going to be on the site. And the Kroll report into the sale plainly showed that there were real and serious failings on the part of the college to think through the strategy it was adopting, because it was essentially the only, I think, college in London that was renting out its property. I beg your pardon, it was paying rent on property it previously owned. When I joined the authority, and immediately following the Grenfell tragedy, we were doing lots of work with the college because we couldn't really, and the DFE, because we couldn't really understand how we got into a position where the college couldn't really finance the rental payments on property that it only sold 2 years earlier. And really it was the failure of due diligence by the college which prompted questions about our purchase of it, and also then a purchase of other properties. But I do think that what we gave was lots of time and resource to Kroll, by that I mean capacity to investigate previous works of the council, previous documents, all prevailing documents that we had. And the Kroll undertook a very, very detailed and in-depth forensic investigation, which is what they were used to. They weren't auditors in the sense that they were just checking on the work of the officers that had written reports. They actually went deep into the detail of this. And I think it's absolutely crucial to say that they found no wrongdoing on the part of decision makers in relation to the decisions that were made in these cases. The point, though, is that decision makers in local government only make decisions on the basis of what advice givers write in reports. And therefore the issue isn't just about decision making, it's critically also about advice giving by professional officers and also engaged consultants. At the time, the best value legislation was in place, and at the time many authorities were adopting a sort of community asset approach. The community asset approach really wasn't heavily taken up in London. It was devised before the crash. The crash happened. Austerity and fiscal consolidation from the coalition government then applied in its heaviest form to local government. And local authorities were really encouraged and triggered to adopt commercialisation approaches, approaches of selling assets, and so on. And it was really only those authorities in areas that had low land value that adopted a community asset approach based on social investment, or a very light approach to best value. Most authorities that were in areas of high land value, and that's specifically in central London, they eschewed that approach really and adopted approaches that were based on how could we gain commercial rental income. And this authority at the time, 10% of its revenue base was supported by rental income, and the then Director of Property Strategy wrote in a report that actually it could be, they could target it to being 20%. So it was obviously the case that some officers were feeling that with the onset of austerity, that they could make up the difference by renting out commercial rental income and gaining that. Now, as it happens, I think it rose from 10 to 13 or 14%. But that is much greater than is the case elsewhere. So in Westminster, I think it rose to just under 10%. In Camden, it's about 6%. Most local authorities in London, it's in the 1 and 2% of total revenues come from commercial rental income. Obviously, this authority, when you have land value that's high and you have many competing uses for that, then you actually have a market. Most other authorities didn't have a market. And so I can see why this strategy was adopted, but even in the eyes at the time, it was a narrowly cast strategy about focusing on the finances and not focusing on assets and property as a facility and as a base for service delivery, community engagement and so on. So I feel that the issues for us really are about, for officers and for members, about advice giving and decision making. So for example, on paragraph 44, it sets out what the National Audit Office say about governance and good governance, but I've put in paragraphs 46 to 48 that actually members are ill-served if they're only offered weak appraisals or solutions in search of problems by officers, or simply poor evidence in support of a range of limited options. It's ever so easy for professionals to feel this is the solution, and then they don't do a thorough appraisal of that solution, whether that's about revenue spending or capital investment, or in this case, changing capital investment into capital revenue stream. You need to look through what are the options, what is the full suite of options, and what are the costs and benefits and consequences of each of those, rather than just jump quickly to what you think is the solution for this particular site. And I do think that there's issues about individual decision making when it comes to particularly assets and strategic approaches. Now, there was a strategic approach. It was structured by King Sturge. It was independent. But again, it was a strategic approach looking at it through a corporate property lens. It didn't look at it through a resourcing or a service supporting lens. And this is the problem in local government. As you know, you'll be on various scrutiny committees. Local authorities perform multiple functions, not all of which are easily aligned. There's competing claims and for use of particular sites and particular purposes, and it's very important that we look at all the possibilities, not boiling the ocean by analysing, prevaricating so that we never draw a conclusion, but actually doing a thorough and comprehensive approach. Because when local authorities are focused narrowly, they miss the point. They hit their target and they miss the point. And the point is about public betterment in a locality across all of our range of services. Now, we've learnt that lesson very, very harshly through the Grenfell tragedy, and I think we can draw upon this report by Kroll to improve many things about how we're operating, and the recommendations under paragraph 5 set those out. The ones that have been mentioned are about social investment and linking social investment to assets more generally. But I would also point out the last two elements, 5.5 and 5.6, which is that we are, as officers, with a monitoring officer, David Hughes and myself, we are structuring an approach for all report authors across the council, not just the senior managers that clear the reports, but the officers that draft the reports. So it's about report authoring and report clearing, and it's also an issue about we need to go through with members, both executive members that are making decisions, but also scrutiny members, because the issue is you need to challenge those that are making executive decisions. Now, the issue about that is that often we see reports to, and I say in my last paragraph there, that some of these criticisms will always be, it may be opportune to levy them against a report this week or next week or whatever, because local authorities are always in a rush to make decisions, and yet they are trying to make decisions in the round. And the important thing to bear in mind all the time when whether decisions are made as a transport authority, as an adult social care authority, as a children's authority, as a housing authority, we are an authority that encompasses all these things, that whenever these decisions are made, they must be Wednesbury reasonable, they must have relevant information, they must eschew irrelevant information, they must be proportionate, they must evaluate risks, and they must be the best professional advice that we can muster, orchestrated for members to make the decision. Sometimes advice may be unwelcome because a particular solution is preferred. It's rare that the case that unwelcome advice doesn't lead to a good solution in the end. But I do think it's really about overall decision making and governance that we've changed dramatically since these times, and we're continuing to change and improve now. Sorry, I've gone on a bit.
Thank you, Barry. So yes, I do think it's very important that this report found no wrongdoing, no malfeasance, but that doesn't mean that some of the thinking wasn't wrong. And we must remember that it was against, as Barry says, a background of cuts, and what I guess the leadership team of the day were trying to do was to maximise profit out of the assets. But I mean, what didn't happen then was really listening to the residents, because I remember very clearly the chamber being invaded by protesters over the North Kensington Library. And so in a way, I think that in trying to make money to protect services, I think some of the lead members forgot what the authority was for and didn't really listen to the residents or include them in their deliberations. And I think a lot of change has happened. I mean, as Mary said, we have discussed yesterday the social investment property. It's a new way of looking at assets and you know, how to get the most out of them and what in fact the most really means. And I think it is a balance, because going forward we are still in a precarious situation financially, but we have really got to learn to listen to the residents more. And you know, when it comes to assets like libraries, and that understand that they have an emotional significance to some of our residents, and they aren't just bricks and mortar. And so, yes, but I do think that a lot has changed since those times. And having said that, I will invite questions. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to declare an interest here. I have been part of the Save the Warnington College, and I think it's only fitting to mention that. And I've also sit community stakeholder meetings, not regularly, but here and there. But I have been part of that Save the Warnington College, and I think it's fitting to mention that. So for that reason, I won't probably talk about the college's issues with this report, if that's okay.
Yes. Greg.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much to the lead member and the Chief Executive for their introductions. The report seems to me to be very thorough, it's well evidenced and it's balanced. But I'm wondering, because I haven't heard of them before, who are Kroll? Councillor Wheel said they're trusted by the community, but what are their credentials for doing a detailed investigation like this, and why would I employ Kroll if I wanted something investigated?
If I may, Chair, thank you, Councillor. So, a number of reasons. Kroll are an internationally respected organisation who carry out investigations for non-governmental organisations across the globe. They look and carry out forensic examinations, particularly around fraud and corruption in sort of areas, in those sort of activities and organisations across the world. I think the key element here, though, is that they were commissioned to carry out the review for Kensington and Chelsea College, which meant they had a unique insight into what had happened in terms of that transaction already, and that the community were able to feel trust in them because they'd carried out that review independently and thoroughly, and that helped us then to be able to see that as a base for them to then conduct their investigation here into the 4 property transactions.
Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you. And this is an open one. Marie-Therese, you alluded to the previous cabinet, clearly, a number of years ago, making decisions, and they took their decisions, and they may not have taken sufficient emotional, they may not have been sufficiently emotionally aware of the importance of certain buildings to the local community, and I absolutely get that. But I think one of the questions I would ask is, there's this, and it sort of ties in with page 21 on the report, because much of the money from the rent of these properties in the north actually went to providing services, council services in the north, and disproportionately many of the council services are in the north, and I would say rightly in the north, and my ward is fairly much in the north, and I live in the north. But it may be that actually if certain vociferous groupings do not want a decision to be made about use of a building, that actually they need to be more aware of what the consequences are of that building not being able to be rented out or whatever. Can you just throw that open? And I have one other point as well to make.
Well, as someone who's tried desperately to map both needs and resources for many years, it is extremely difficult to say where the resources are deployed, because I think in our case it's 54%, it says, of revenue. In most authorities, about 2/3 of total revenues on children's and adult social care. Now, the adult social care, it depends what it is, because sometimes you're mapping where that resource is, you know, in other words, where the care homes are, as opposed to where the people come from. And often in trying to map things, you can find there are generally 4 postcodes. The postcode of the perpetrator, the postcode of the victim, the postcode of the incident, and the postcode of where the person got arrested. That's the case in crime maps. There are 4 different maps you can have of the same crime. And when you're looking at issues, say, for example, in social policy, where is it that the children who are living are getting the resource? Well, they're getting the resource mostly because of their intense or acute need, or because of their vulnerability in their family situation. So you could map where they've moved to, or where they're from, or where it's very, very difficult to come up with a geography of expenditure. What you'll find is that you can map where community organisations are based. And there'll be lots of community organisations in, say, for example, North Kensington. That doesn't mean to say that the council spends more money there. You could say, well, look, where's the expenditure on the HR, on the housing revenue account? Well, that's obviously in places. You can map that, and plainly that's where the local authorities' properties are. But I don't think it's straightforward to say this income supports services in this area. No, it supported the overall expenditure in revenue, 60% of which or thereabouts would be in children's adult social care and 40% in other areas. So we don't hypothecate the revenues that we get unless the government insists upon it, like in public health grants or whatever. And therefore I think it's difficult to assert what you suggested, to be frank. And I think I would argue that it's a pointless exercise to try and do that, because you'd have to work out all the other advantages and disadvantages as well that are geographically based. So, for example, there's a spatial variation in needs, there's a spatial variation in provision, there's spatial variations in performance of that provision. We don't know whether the acute problems arise more from the need, or from the resource variation, or from performance. And that applies in GPs, in social work, and actually in many of the things we do in local authorities. I may be heretic on this because my research is in social geography, so I always assume mapping anything on the basis that it masks more than it reveals.
David?
I think in the context of what we're having to wear, Barry, that was a suitably apposite comment to complete with. My other comment is a slightly different one. Page 38 of the report talks about how some of the, particularly some communities in the north, did not feel that their views had been taken into consideration and have persistently lobbied to change the policy. I get that, but that is one of the problems of consultation, that you can absolutely clearly say, whatever your view is, other people who take the decision listen, evaluate, and then come to a decision opposite to the one that you were lobbying for. That is what has happened time and time again, and if there's a binary decision that's been made, either something will happen or won't, I don't really know what more to say than that is one of the problems of consultation, that people always have expectations that if they're heard, their view will be acted on, which is not always the case.
After you, Mary.
I think I mean, you're absolutely right, but I think what I alluded to earlier is our desire to get better at doing consultation, and that's not and you're absolutely right that, you know, sometimes the answer won't be what people want, despite the fact you've consulted with them. But it's things like consulting earlier on in the process so that the options presented or worked through properly are perhaps different to the ones that if you'd set off without any consultation. And it's about also how you play back your decision-making process, the transparency and clarity with which you say, we heard that, we're going to do part of it, but not all of it, and this is why. And so those are the things I think that we're really trying to get better at doing, whilst acknowledging your absolutely basic and essential point.
Thank you, and a very different question for the last one. This report at the bottom, dated in February, it says private and confidential. Clearly this paper is in the public domain. Have those people who want to see it, everyone, seen it?
So absolutely, Councillor Lindsay. So we went through a process with Kroll to review the draft report. They went through a process of reviewing the findings with those who were named in the report to make sure they were satisfied with the findings. So we're very clear that due diligence was done before the report was provided in final form.
Councillor Pascal.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to hear from to see in the report, and also to hear from officers and from the lead member, that the conclusion seems to be that there was no wrongdoing at the time, because there was considerable worry amongst groups at the time that there was some wrongdoing. And the fact that this has been confirmed has also been followed by remarks about, nevertheless, we can learn now, but also in the light of the decisions that we made as a council and the undertakings we made post the terrible disaster of Grenfell. So this is part of a journey and a learning process, and I take the lead member's point that even where we've got to now is not perfect, and we're on a journey to continuously improve, if that's the right phrase. Therefore, I think we've rightly changed our culture, and we've rightly listened more to residents. We could improve that process. Sometimes I feel that although it's right for us to listen to those who do shout loudest, that we don't have a means yet of listening to some of the people who are not confident enough to speak out, either as individuals or groups, who are perhaps not so practiced or energetic in their ability to put things across in public or in writing. So whilst I think we've made progress, I don't think we've listened to the whole community yet. And I think that that's a job that we still need to make more progress on. Therefore, it's right to say that we've changed the way also from looking at the report of how we now do things. I've got two questions though. One is, in the report it mentions that councillors are elected for a prime purpose of bettering the community. There's representations, all sorts of aspects, but the phrase that came out to me in the report was the betterment of the community. And going back to what Councillor Lindsay said, not necessarily on a geographic basis, but are we sure that whilst we get benefit of being more responsive to maybe the emotional side of the community, or however is respectful to put it, that we actually are still achieving the best value in terms of resource use? Because sometimes there's a balance to be struck between, if you like, pounds and pennies on one hand, and desires, good and right desires of local community who value things for their own long-held purposes. And the community sentiment has a value, and it is right that we should be recognising that. But are we now sure that we are as efficient in producing our services as we might be, or that we've paid enough attention to improving the efficiency of those services? And another question alongside that, is there a role going forward to change what still seems to be a culture of producing often excellent individual but siloed services, to a culture of a fully integrated, resident-centric council service? It may sound simplistic, but I almost would like to eventually leave the council having made some contribution to getting rid of that one S at the end of services and towards service to the community.
Mr. Mary.
I think you alluded to a point really that David also raised earlier, which is about that balancing act between, which I referred to, between getting financial value and social value out of things. I think, and absolutely that concerns me, and we need to do both. But I think one of the things I've learnt with the procurement strategy is sometimes you can have your cake and eat it. It might not be a very huge cake, but you can actually extract quite a lot of value, social value, without losing too much financial value in some, not all circumstances. And I think that, and by consulting earlier with things as well, you can perhaps get some ideas about what kind of extra value you could extract from that. And absolutely take your point about working in silos. And so to some extent, something like the social value strategy does stretch across everything that we do. And having some of those overarching strategies in place now really does help us to work together, because it makes you, if you're going to follow the strategy, which obviously you ought to, you do have to give considerations to the wider council on something like that. So I have some hopes that we will do what you're aspiring for us to do.
Janet.
Thank you very much for this report. I thought it was really enlightening. I thought it was well written. I thought it was balanced. And I wish more people would read it, actually. So I wanted to ask, I see they did say there were problems in terms of engagement and communication. And when dealing with the communities, there often is a question of suspicion, and I was wondering how involved are they in the financial benefits in terms of their input, and what communication we have with them in terms of that. Perhaps it's just an extrapolation on what Councillor Lindsay said, but I'm wondering how instead of constantly being suspicious and wondering what the council is up to, do we do enough communication with the communities in explaining to them what the benefits are, hearing what benefits they would like, and trying to work in that fashion?
Thank you. I think that we began this with our budget consultation in 2019, really, and we only began it, and it's a thing that we need to do more and more. Very few people, very few councillors, very few local government officers realise that 2/3 of the budget goes on 3% of the population. And in fact, sometimes we're actually scared to say that because there's a sort of worry of populist majoritarianism, that actually if you were to reveal this, people might say, you shouldn't be spending all this money on these people with these acute and intense needs. But when authorities have done that, and they have done discussions, and they have discussed with their public what they spend their resources on, what the balance is and how they do it, and what the public feels when they ask the public, what do you feel? The vast and overwhelming majority of people come to the same conclusion as the council does, that it should spend resources on people who are the most vulnerable and living at the most risk. I think that the question was specific in relation to Kensington and Chelsea because our services were acknowledged by regulators to be excellent. I mean, they were the children's services the best in the country, and adult social care was up there in relation to being extremely good. And so the authority had these really excellent services. Now, how do you get excellent services? You get them by professionals working with the people that are service users. So their background was in consulting with service users about how to do things more in line, more in, promoting autonomy and independence, giving a sense of empowerment, but also connecting all with young people about their ambitions and so on. But when you have 100 or so children in care, when you're supporting a few hundred families that need early help, when you're supporting 1,000 or so adults, it's not surprising that the vast majority of the public think, well, what do I get from council services? And so I think it's really important that we explain all the time what it is that we're getting. But I don't think it's a case of saying, well, we consult with service users, so let's consult with the community. Because, I mean, you just have to be here in Central London for 5 minutes to realise that community is a sort of layered, dynamic kaleidoscope. There's communities of place, of interest, of identity, of faith, and so on. And so it's incumbent on us to look at the particular service or facility and say, what is the potential for this? Who are the communities that use this? What is the range of communities and what's the potential for that? So with whom do we consult about its use? Rather than just thinking, as I think we did in the past, service, how can we keep these excellent services going? We can only operate when we have a licence to operate. And we realised immediately after Grenfell that we'd lost a licence to operate, really, because we hadn't done sufficient work with our community. And I think that we've learnt that lesson and we're trying to improve on that. And I think your challenge is the right one about making sure that we engage more and more in depth and depth with wider and wider communities of place, identity, interest and faith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just two questions which are not education related or college related. On 3.9, page 37, I was referring to cultural consideration, and also within that page, it's also talking about a council which is focused on revenue generation rather than or above than community impact. If we look at both of them, we of course as a council have to generate revenue to run the services. It's clear and everybody's interested to have money in the pot so that we can spend on family, children, housing and so on. But the problem here is we've gone, or as the report says, we've gone too far on the revenue generation rather than the community impact. How can we in the future, as the leadership of the council, how can we in the future to strike that balance where we can also be culturally sensitive, but at the same time, generating revenue to serve our community, but not leaving the community impacted behind in the moving forward.
I suppose I go back to my response, which is, yes, acknowledging that it's a very difficult balancing act, that sometimes you can get both income and some social benefits and be culturally sensitive, but really it goes back to really good engagement early on, listening both to the quiet voices and to the slightly more assertive voices. And that is, we're building up a department to make us better at that, and investing a lot of resource in being better able to listen, to be better aware of the strengths of feelings and where they, what they are derived from in the community. So I just wouldn't say that we are there at the moment, but we really are trying to improve on that aspect of how we do things and get that balance better.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Yes, do. And I'll call.
Thank you. On the regards of we're not there and we're getting there, do you think the way forward could be working with different councillors, both from the north and the south, and making sure that they are representatives of the communities? And if there are local issues, for example, we've talked about the last meeting, I think the number of young graduates who don't have jobs, the number of people who are looking for in the borough to get decent paid jobs, and everything else that not only generate money but also getting our youth into employment. I think the way forward from now onwards for the council to listen is also to listen and work with, regardless of the color of the brand they're wearing, any political, I think it's about time the leadership to listen and work with different councillors so that we can all move in the right direction, regardless of who's leading the council.
I completely agree, and I think on many issues we do already work very well together, but I'm sure there's more to contribute in the future. But I don't think this council has ever been sort of particularly politically riven. I think we've always worked well together, but I think we can always improve on those things. So I'm very happy, and I'm sure the rest of the leadership team is open to that as well.
No.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The most important finding in this report is about engagement and consultation. We could, as elected members and officers in the council, we could take any decision, and the conclusion in the report says there is no wrongdoing, but encouraging and consultation was missing. The problem with consultation until now, even after Greenfield, we are targeting established organizations and specific individuals whom are known to us, and I've been calling for this for years, and even before Greenfield. I call this negative consultation because we always target the same people time after time, and we know their views. We need to think to change our views. We need to engage more people. We have experts in all fields in our communities who are willing to contribute if they are asked, if they are approached, to contribute and give their time and energy to assist us to become. We have experts in all fields in the communities, but we have never managed to reach out for them even after Greenfield. We have been elected as councillors, we've been elected, but we need to give time and chance to those who elected us from the first place to have a say in everything. If we are in office for many years, we think if we drafted our document, we spent 3 months or 6 months on it, it becomes so precious to us that we will grab it, hold it to our chest. It's very important to us. It's natural, we are humans. We think if after a year, if somebody comes and says, I disagree with this, I want to remove this, or maybe they want to demolish the entire document, and they will ask you to come up, they will feed you with new ideas. We need to be open for that. We need to be open-minded and try to target those who are out of reach until this moment. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, personally, I think most people solve most of their own problems most of the time. And when they can't, they get together with other people that have similar problems to them. They try and solve them socially together. And when that doesn't happen, they look to the state. And I think one of the problems of the last 30, 40 years is that the state thought that it solves problems first. And it doesn't. It helps people solve their own problems. But it can only do that if it reaches out to people and understands and appreciates the challenges that they have. So I think it's crucial for public organisations to extend, as was why one of the recommendations here is about the Charter of Public Participation and making that part of the DNA of our organisation. Not just presuming that because we're professional experts or political decision makers that actually we know what's right, because we're probably experts in theory, but we're not experts in practice. That's the people that live, that are experts in lived practice. So I think it's really important that we understand the fundamentals, which is that you are an elected government, and this is self-government by the people who elect people here, and it's the councillors here that make decisions. But in making those decisions, they have to have proper regard to the way in which the organisation connects with its community and gets information back from that community about what is the right way forward. And that's why this co-design, this commissioning together with designing things with the community, not for them, is the right way forward. So I agree with what you're saying, and that's why I think Councillor will refer to voices that we don't hear, that we must go beyond just the people that we know to connect with, as much as we're able to, the people who actually need services, and they may have strong advocates that we can use as well, not just themselves, but advocates for them. But it's very likely that in a borough of this size, that communities will stretch across the borough boundaries, across the whole of London even. London is a mixed diaspora of people from all over the world. They mainly didn't come to live in one part, they came to London, and they've settled here, and they've got connections throughout the place. So we find that when we have working with community groups, they don't think necessarily of the borough boundary, of the walled boundary. They're thinking of their needs, of their family, their communities, which may be stretched over a wider area. So we need to be humble in how we approach these issues, I think, as an institution.
Mary?
If I could just add, I mean, reaching the hard to reach is the sort of holy grail, I suppose, of communications, and getting those people to speak up. But there are a number of things that we can, try, different ways of doing things. And I think, we have to accept that sometimes we're going to fail when we do this, as we go on this kind of learning thing. But there are lots of sort of new technologies as well. For example, I'm very keen to hear the voices of younger people. And sometimes maybe using new technologies and quick polls and stuff is something that I know that the Communities Department are looking into to try and sort of tease out some of that response from people that we don't hear of so often. And I think that's a good thing, but it won't work every time.
May I add one more thing? Thank you. Well, I personally have tried a very old system 3 years ago when Bay 20 consultation was out and we were trying to gather support for it before it was built. I canvassed and door knocked with few volunteers. Within less than a month, I have contacted 300 people. More than, but 300 people agreed in support. The entire organization who was running the consultation, within 6 or 7 months, reached similar number, 300. So the old way sometimes is the best. Human resources, direct contact. Thank
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this feedback and interaction, especially from our Chief Executive, Barry, the way you highlighted this, how you are going to embed it for the way forward. I mean, it doesn't matter what analysis being done in the focus on these 4 areas of transactions. Everything's come at a cost, as Mary Will said, and that's need to be, as a council, responsible. We need to be conscious of, that's true, but the further cost is the lesson learned from any case analysis or study, and that's how I'd like to see the way forward. I mean, just Councillor Will just mentioned about the youth in the engagement, because they are our future, and they have different ways, different mechanism of engaging. Even when they are using multimedia, they have their own vocabulary in communication. I know that from a simple piece of research. They have their own, they devise their own ways, their own terms, their own vocabulary. And as Councillor Bakhtiar said, okay, there are other ways to outreach. So it's really combining this balance of consultation, communication. It's really all down to where we want to be in the future to cover, because the cost, and you mentioned Grenfell, in that respect, I don't want to go into more details regarding what's being mentioned in the report, because there is a quite few reference to it. But the lesson learned, and you highlighted very nicely, and we are very fortunate that you are aligning it to your strategy in terms of developing it further. So hopefully I would like to see that more being done in a workshop fashion way to align it to the change of culture in the way we interact, our officers interact with our residents in the wider sense. I mean, I welcome the way you frame it and the way you acknowledge what's been the outcome of this report and how you are going strategically move forward with it. I mean, you have our support for that, Barry. So yeah, thank you very much for even stepping on it in a very transparent and concise way. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wanted to ask a slightly different question from last time I spoke, which is that we rightly, if we listen and also if we collect the data and find out who the people of greatest need are, we focus resources on there. But recently I've been involved in conversations in 3 different contexts: education, health, and environment, on a personal basis, but with cohorts that I have an involvement with who come from different sectors of the community. And the debate was around how we, on one hand, focus a large proportion of our resources on the acute, critical, current issues, and then how we also take a balanced approach to the long-term, non-immediate, non-acute issues. And if you think through children at school, what attitude they have to each other. I think, Barry, you introduced the word civicism to me when I was mayor. Attitudes to that, their diet, the way they deal with social media, a whole number of different things. Aspiration is a big one as well. In the health sector, talking with a tertiary foundation trust, they have a problem with the fact that we're not engaging seriously with public health, prevention, resilience. As the King's Fund put it, if the community doesn't do 85% of the job, the acute and long-term providers can't cope. We noticed how things shifted in the COVID time in that direction, and how they couldn't cope and had to divert, and now we're living with a wave of stored up trouble that we have from the past. Environment has been another one where there are many issues to do with the environment where it's not crucial to do the thing today. It's not something necessarily that, if a 16-year-old has a few quid they're going to spend on, but if it isn't invested in now, maybe they'll have a world they can't live in by the time they become parents. So these long-term issues are very, very difficult to grasp with in a elected democracy in terms of creating the right kinds of investment across and policy and investment. And I'm wondering how our new approach to things addresses these sort of long-term issues.
Mary, would you like to answer? Or Barry?
I think we'll both try to answer. You're tempting us into deep water, I think. But the issue is both, I think, on too many occasions we only think of the state as distributive, and therefore whether it's the central government or local government, that the role is distributive. And the argument becomes about, is the distribution just? Is the distribution fair? There's also a question about the role of the state in recognising people's contribution. It's called contributive justice. And actually that's probably the lesson of the last 10 years, in that there's been far too much focus on the unfairness of distribution and not really on how people feel about how they're being regarded by their government, regarded by their local council and so on. And so where there's been this disjuncture between the public at large and the government, or political parties standing for office, for example, or in councils where there's been that, it's because people have felt that they're not included, and that this discussion isn't about them. Their contribution doesn't matter. And so I think that the community engagement is really also about that. It's not just about short-term and long-term. It's about the nature of, it says, I think, somewhere in the beginning of our constitution that really we're about what you as elected members do with the public that elects you and that votes you out as well, and what you do in between to connect with them as citizens. And we talk a lot about inequalities of health and wealth and so on, but there's inequalities of citizenship, and that's the agenda that I think is so important, really, that if people feel that they're not full participants, when they're told they are, regardless of wealth and income and ethnicity and gender and any other factors about them, of their attributes, everyone should have equal involvement in their community, and their involvement should have recognised contribution. So I think that that's the thing that's been lacking, and I also think it's the thing that's been lacking particularly, I wouldn't say this is an issue that only exists in Kensington Chelsea. I think it exists throughout London, in my experience, which is that particular things applied to social tenants, who really since the turn of the century, since 1999, have been forgotten. In the year, I was sorry to digress, I hope you don't mind, in 1999, I was the government's Y2K champion. I don't know if you can remember Y2K. I think Councillor O'Nagi will remember Y2K. You remember as well. And just look up how much was spent by the nation on the risk that was manufactured, really, synthetic risk. Well, I checked out how many local authority homes were built that year. None. Absolutely none. Zero. So here was a time when, this isn't this government, this was previous governments. Here was a time when we were really exercised about a risk that might happen. And I was, I have to say, believing in this was a real problem at the time. But the real problem was that we weren't investing in social housing. We weren't even attending to it. And so I think that really has left a really big legacy, 20 years of neglect, really, in social housing, particularly in London, because most people in London rent. Outside London, people don't rent to the same extent, anywhere near as much as they do in London. But the second issue really is, how do we make long-term challenges like climate change urgent? Because they are. They don't seem urgent because the COVID seems urgent, but actually they are urgent. We need to do urgent work on them now. And I think some of that is the fault of accountants and auditors about time framing things. That why do we have a 30-year time frame for discounting when actually, you know, we should be thinking 100 years, bluntly. So I do think we need to look at the fundamentals of climate change and work out how we can foreshorten our judgment about the urgency of that issue. So I think that there's two dimensions to your question.
Okay. Are there any more questions? So I will bring this discussion to a conclusion. And just to sum up, what I'm hearing from some members here is a worry about funding and about money and about protecting our services, and that obviously if we take a more community-centric, collegiate approach to our assets, there is going to be an opportunity cost to that. If you take that attitude, you are not going to get as much money as you would by simply sweating your assets to the maximum. But what I would say on the other side is there is a price to be paid. You know, if we don't listen to the residents who have put us here, and when that compact between the council and the residents breaks down, as it has with us, you know, in this room, it is a price we have had to pay, and it is because of that we have had to sort of readjust our thinking and pay more attention to what our residents want, because you can look at it the north of the borough and the south of the borough, but we have an obligation to all of our residents, whether they voted for us or not, whether they're in our ward or not. We have, as a councillor of the council, we have that obligation. And I am heartened by the fact that, you know, Mary is pursuing policies or strategies of social investment, and that a lot of the conversation tonight has been about engagement, because that really is the key, and obviously difficult to get to the quiet voices. But how we consult and how we engage with our residents is of paramount importance, because if we don't, the whole thing breaks down. And you know, what are we? I mean, exactly, if our residents don't acknowledge our authority. So, I mean, that's just my way of looking at it, and I think that the positive sides are that this report does not say there was any wrongdoing. In other words, it was all well-intentioned. It might not have been the right road to go down, but the intentions were good. And I know the people who took these decisions, and that is what I believe. But I think in view of what's happened, that we all have to find a different way. And I think the way forward is engagement and consultation and social investment. So thank you very much, Barry and Mary and Mr. Hughes for coming. Thank you. So moving on to the work programme. I'll just give him a chance to leave. So this is more of a backward look at this year than going forward, which obviously we have to set the work programme for next year. And I'm mindful of the fact that I get emails and people make comments, etc., that scrutiny, we're just marking our own homework and scrutiny is just as awful as it always was, and all the rest of it. And that's quite a constant. So what I'm trying to say is, having listened to quite big parts of the inquiry, and I know we're not allowed to really comment on it except to say that it did give a very central importance to scrutiny for any of those people, for those of you who've watched it. And I think they even gave an importance to scrutiny that we've got more power than we actually do have. But so I would say that's something we have to bear in mind. And the other thing that came out from the inquiry, it was that, you know, residents' involvement being very important. So what I was going to say is, when I'm going to ask all the chairs to go through what they've done this year, but I'll do overview and scrutiny first. And I just think, in view of what people are saying, sort of the negative bits, I think we all have to be aware of how we evaluate ourselves, you know, how many reports, you know, at the end of the year, the reports that have been produced, have they gone to full council, and also the amount of recommendations that have been taken out. For example, Josh has taken up a lot of recommendations from Janet's report. So I think we have to look at that. And I will be discussing tomorrow the stock take that we've had from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny with the chairs. We're discussing that tomorrow morning. And I don't know, maybe at a later stage, are we going to bring it to OSC? I don't know. Okay, I'm discussing it with the chairs, and that has some kind of instructions for us in order to improve. A lot of them, I'm going to say now, I'm not supposed to, but a lot of it is about cross-party working. I, for one, think that training is really important, that we have all had Sunita helping us and training us, and I think she has been excellent, and I want that to carry on this year. If I can get it, I would like all the scrutiny councillors to get some more training, because I think sometimes people's questioning skills are, they're not sort of, they're too soft, they don't kind of go for the, you know, the jugular, and so I think we could be more probing, put it that way, in our questioning skills. And when we think about what we're looking at in scrutiny, we have to look at things primarily that we can really make an impact on and add value to. And then there's the issue of amplifying the voices of the residents and picking up, you know, the thing is having a sensitive ear to what matters to residents. So what we have done in overview in scrutiny, I think worked well. And thanks to Adrian, I think the budget working group has been very successful. Mary and the finance officers have been very generous with their time, and I think that has really worked well. And we've been able to sort of drill down into the budget quite a lot. I think that some of the Grenfell issues with the Grenfell recovery and the dedicated service have worked well, as well as the trees, the Woodington Green trees, and the petition that came. And then in overview, we have statutory things that we have to do. Every year we have the leader and the chief executive come and they give us an address on the state of the borough. Again, this time I got a complaint from someone anonymous because we were in the middle of COVID, you know, really raging pandemic. It was all about COVID, so people felt that we weren't really challenging or probing the council enough. But you know, that's what some people think. And then, yeah, we do crime and disorder. And so for me, what's worked well this year is some of the Grenfell papers and the budget and finance scrutiny. And we have had to do quite a lot on COVID, because in the beginning we were allowed one meeting, and it was only OSC. We couldn't have individual select committees, and we had, you know, a meeting about COVID and everything. So yeah, that has also occupied us this year. But I would like to go, okay, Kazim, if you would like to start.
Summary, okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I can understand if some people say the scrutiny wasn't right, or we were marking our own homeworks. Of course, there will always be issue when people are not here and doing the work we're doing. And for that reason, I think it's open democracy. They can always say what they want. But what we have done last year as housing and communities, I think, was exceptional in terms of the work we have done. The year started with invitation that we've given to Dr. Safran Woodcraft, who is a lecturer and academic from UCL Institute for Global Prosperity and also a member of the London Prosperity Board. And she's giving us an opportunity to know more about housing and communities and the relationship of having a community that is integrated, a community that's working together, a community that understands the value of each other. And I think it was really important. And before that, there was a gap in the scrutiny, and there was almost 8 months of a scrutiny gap when it comes to the community's leadership. So we covered that. We have a lot of agendas. In fact, some of our agendas, I could say, we have been told it was too long, and we had to do a lot of work. And I think for that, I will not agree with what others have said. I think we have done a fair but tough scrutiny year, and I'm sure the Vice Chair would agree, and the rest of the committee would agree for the housing. October onwards as well, we've covered Grenfell. Grenfell was a theme that we kept going back to, as well as COVID-19. Because of some of the areas we could not cover on working group, what we have done was we have taken the decision to make a themed scrutiny meeting. For example, repairs. We had a scrutiny themed for Grenfell on its own. We have the themed scrutiny meeting for homes that fit for human habitation, as well as the working group report led by Councillor Greg Hammond. We also have the repairs. Moving forward, we have extended one more meeting to our meeting. I think after the overview and the scrutiny committee, we hold most of the meetings in terms of scrutiny, and we finished with the year going back to Grenfell-related issues, Grenfell Wider Community Project, and the reports from Housing and Health Safety. As future key decisions, also we've been looked into social investment and the review of the Kensington and Chelsea tenancy conditions, as well as the final meeting of the 24th of last month. We had the New Homes Program, as well as empty homes strategy, and finally COVID-19 response, and what we have been doing with our voluntary sectors and vulnerable people. I think overall what we could say, we could maybe have less of agenda items and concentrate 2 to 3 items and give more time. That's something we've learned, and because of, and I've already told you the reason we have many items on the agenda at one point, because one of the lead members or one of the scrutiny areas hasn't been scrutinized for almost 6 to 8 months. So we had to cover a lot of ground. But this year we know now what's required, and we already continue to what we have done. Going back to the working report, the recommendations that has been published, I think the lead member will have a few months to come back to us and take some recommendations, but we will go back to it. It's also part of our agenda this year, kind of an item agenda to go back and see what the recommendation has been done. I would say overall the housing and communities had a busy year, and we're also looking forward to another busy year. Most importantly, if I were to say what was the highlight for the year, was the community participation of our scrutiny. I think there's only one meeting we haven't had members of the public to come and speak on our committee, and I think that's a highlight for the year. If we can get more people to come and present their cases at the scrutiny meetings, that's the way forward, and we will continue to do the same for this year forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, but I should have said there was a gap. I know a very long gap when COVID hit and we were not allowed to have meetings, and it was too long, but you know, we got meetings going as soon as we could. So anyway, who wants to go next? Janet.
Yes, our committee, Family Services Select Committee, it is defined by legislation, and we do have statutory duty. We pay attention to that. We have had an underlying theme throughout the year and a commitment to Grenfell provision for the community, and also for the COVID-19. We have looked at the provision and making sure that families were being provided with services and with equipment that they so needed for education at home. We work with reports. I've been lucky to have very good working groups, and the way we work, and it's worked for our committee, is that we have working groups, then we present the report. We had an excellent one from Councillor Hammond, Councillor Zadurian with their group, and we follow it up. So that's helped us a lot. Councillor Hammond's group brought school exclusions to the forefront, and we are following that up, and we will be looking at school inclusions now to see what has been done as a consequence. And we have also been investigating early childhood provision for the Grenfell families and the nursery provision, and we have had one meeting dedicated to safeguarding, and that is a statutory duty, and we always stay on top of that every year. And we bring in a specialist who is a consultant on safeguarding, and she has been very helpful to us. From the Central Scrutiny, I'm sorry, I forgot her name, you would know it. No, not Sunita. Sunita is excellent as a consultant, but
Councillor?
there's a specialist on the safeguarding.
It was from the Local Government Association. It was Jane Humphreys, who is a former Director of Families and Adult Services at another council, so Local Government Association.
Organizations that I don't remember every single one, but she's been very helpful to us, Jane Humphreys. And she also participated at the meeting and watched how we work, which was really good. Then we have Sunita, who's helped all of us, and she watches, she's also from one of the Central Scrutiny organizations, and I found she's really helpful in terms of examining our questioning technique and the way we work and how we interact with the public and with the other members of the community. So I thought that was really productive. We had a single issue meeting which dealt with education support provided by the council to students affected by the Grenfell tragedy. We interviewed 5 schools, and we had different areas of therapy, which we interviewed the heads, including art therapy and some other therapies that were alternative therapies, which were very helpful to traumatized children. We look at Grenfell and COVID at every meeting because we want to see, A, what was done, and what is being done as a result of people who've been traumatized. And in terms of COVID-19, we've looked not only looking at psychological problems, but also practical problems in terms of education, catching up, etc. What I would like to change, and we could not do because of COVID-19, are visit some of the schools this year, when we were able to do that 2 years ago. And I would like to continue doing that because we need to act, we cannot be totally theoretical. It's very important to go out and see what's going on in the schools, and I would like to look at some of the special needs schools. And we have a new special needs school in North Kensington, and we'll be visiting Marlborough School, which also has a very strong special needs department, and we'll be looking at autism. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Will, and then Marwan.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to go in whichever order. In terms of this last year, the foci that we've had on planning has been one. We've had a strong presentation from Kensal, from the planners about Kensal and the SPD there, how that's being developed. The discussion in the committee, scrutinising that, led to recommendations but also a call from officers for a supplementary report balancing some of the issues to do with density, high-rise, environmental sustainability and community sustainability as well. That supplementary information we got from officers was probably more interesting than the original report, and I would like to commend it. We've had a look and a discussion about the Greening SPD, the Royal Brompton SPD. The Royal Brompton one is one of the first SPDs that looks at a range of issues in planning terms, not only land use, but topography, what the townscape is made to be, how that might be improved, how the economic demands of the site might yield medical and social and community use, which is the land use at the moment, rather than the sort of assumed obvious alternative that would happen through redevelopment or perhaps buy-to-leave private housing. On the Council's commitment to carbon zero, this was a high-speed project through the whole year. It was moving, probably one of the fastest moving programmes in the Council. This formed, as Barry referred to, cross-working and new culture. There's a Environment Sustainability Strategic Board, which takes on board every department in the whole of the Council. That moved at pace. In terms of the difference we made, scrutiny, we've been arguing for a long time about the importance of buildings in considering carbon footprint. Prior to the ETHA report, it wasn't on the agenda. Once ETHA had done their report, it was 90% of the job that the Council's got to do over the next, what is now 8 years, rather than the 10-year commitment we made 2 years ago in Council. We looked at aspects of achieving carbon zero for the Council. That's 2030 commitment is for the Council's footprint. We didn't only look at the technical side of things and the programme side of things. We looked at where the money was going to come from, how the procurement would be carried out. We had a very, very good paper in from the procurement department. We quizzed that, and as a result of that, it's now registered on the risk register in audit and transparency as well. So we've managed to cross-fertilise into other arms of the Council. We did some work on schools, and we also did some joint working with the Housing and Communities Select Committee on fuel poverty. We looked at it more from the technical aspect, and they looked at it more from the social aspect, but that was a good piece of joint working. The third area that we looked at was the managing of streets, particularly the group called CREST, which deals with all the site enforcements, planning enforcements, noise and nuisance, traffic, parking, etc. And then the antisocial behaviour, we had a presentation on the integrated neighbourhood safety model and sort of how that is beginning to be enabled across the borough. So I'd like to end there. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Chair. Let me start. I mean, all the data, what we discussed, they are there on the website. I hope people who are interested, they can see the format, which I tried to follow last year. So if I focus on the governance of the way I structured the meeting and the way I worked very closely with officers who are very supportive to my thought, to what we are trying to address in that meeting, in the context of, as well, we are all in the same boat regarding the virtual environment, which was very challenging, I think, to all of us. So, but the format I try to follow is to get a colleague in the context after working in consultation with officers to devise the way the content of the meeting, try to make it a single point of discussion and scrutiny to dig deep into the topic under discussion. So I tend to follow the format of inviting an eminent or someone expertise in that area we are trying to discuss to capitalize on their expertise, at the same time to do some piece of research in terms of working group. So my first speaker in that format was one professor from Brunel University who kindly came to address the issue of her research, which I came across regarding adult social care and health in London. So she came and she gave us a quite good insight into her research, and that's actually, that format was really the basis of future research to work with the working group on mental health, which a few months later, Madam Chair, resulted now in further research in her group regarding communication in mental health on digital inclusion, which resulted in far more engagement on long term with our local residents within the Grenfell community. That's what we discussed, within the 500 meters, to really gain a deeper understanding of the dynamics of what's going on in my community. And so this is what I'm trying to capitalize on these, reaching out to some kind of researchers in that field. At the same time, we address another sensitive issue, the Brompton, Royal Brompton Hospital, and that was very highly sensitive topic, which I think it was handled in a very good professional way, giving a chance to everybody to have input. Lately, the most sensitive aspect of the work I was handling there was the suicide, the Appleby report and the suicide dimension, where I invited Professor Appleby to be, a keynote speaker in that session to present his recommendation and to put it in some form of context in the hope to develop it further, to gain a deeper understanding of that dynamic and the trauma that was identified within the Grenfell community, Madam Chair. So that level of engagement with different research group at different universities, I found it very useful as a format. I had a good feedback from Sanita, who gave me really excellent support in terms of understanding the dynamics of the committee and how I'm handling certain topics. And I hope that feedback will reflect in this current year program in terms of following the same pattern of expertise, exactly the same pattern. I found it quite useful. And not only that, so it doesn't finish when we finish the meeting. However, it can continue into a further research to really dig deep into the subject we are trying to address. And this is reflecting in the work program which we are finalizing this year. And the two main working group led by Councillor Thaxter and Councillor Williams, they've done really quite good work, and this is really grateful to them. And the work being done in the research context to supplement their work. So I think adding value to scrutinize our lead member in a substantiated way from independent researchers who are quite respectful in their field in the appropriate topic I've chosen, or we've chosen as a committee actually, with the discussion with the officers in the time frame allowed for us to conduct. So that's all the reflection I need to give for the last year, Madam Chair. And thank you so much as well for our officers, those who are supporting me. I cannot do it without them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marwan. So I'm just going to, the last thing I'm going to say is to draw attention to the final page, page 4, and it says that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is responsible for the creation of an overarching work programme. Now, in the stock take, which I appreciate not everyone has seen, but the chairs have seen, again, it presses for that, and I am being pressed that we, by the scrutiny lot, so I just want to kind of draw attention to the fact that we will set the programme. We've got between now and the 8th of July, and we're not discussing it tomorrow because I just thought we were being bounced into something. So tomorrow I just want to, with the chairs, discuss the stock take. After that, I think we can release the stock take to everyone. I mean, I only held back on it because I was told to, because of the sensitivities of the inquiry and etc. But you know, we'll discuss it tomorrow, and then I'm happy for all the scrutiny councillors for it to be disseminated quite widely. So hopefully we can put it on the agenda and discuss it at some point. Anyway, so I didn't ask any of you three, Mo, David or Greg, if you have anything to say about this. Well, Mo is new, but David, and David, you're not on a select committee, are you? No. Okay, so Greg, do you have anything you would like to say about this year and how it's gone? And what you think's what?
I'll be very brief, Chair, on this because Kasim has summed up what we did on the HCSC very well. One observation, though, we did end up having 6 meetings this year on the HCSC, and I think that was a good thing because the larger number of meetings meant that certainly the last 3 or 4 of them, the agenda wasn't overloaded, and therefore we were able to do what we did do, much more justice, much more thoroughness. So a small amount of good quality work rather than perhaps some of the other scrutiny meetings I've attended in the last 3 years, and indeed perhaps our first 1 or 2 this year, where we had a long and packed agenda and we didn't finish it despite finishing the meeting excessively late. So I think that message of having a larger number of shorter, punchier meetings was good, and I think we got there on our HCSC this year. And I'll also say that 2 of the meetings were themed meetings, and I thought that was particularly good. And I know Marwan just mentioned he had 1, and I think Janet did, and we had 2, and they were very good. That's all I want to emphasise, but Kasim did summarise the HCSC extremely well.
Thanks, Greg. And I agree very much with what you have to say. You know, struggling through a long agenda and not doing justice to anything. It's so much better when you have just 2 or 3 items, or when you have like a single issue, a themed meeting, where you can really have a proper discussion about, you know, whatever it is. That works much better for me anyway. Right, okay, moving on to the KDs.
Sorry, Mary-Therese, can I raise a different point? Page 9, the scrutiny options and methodologies on Appendix 2. I slightly disagree with the pre-decision scrutiny of key decisions at formal committee meetings and the bullet points next to it. What does it do and how? Review and comment on proposed decisions at a comparatively late stage of their development. No. It's meant the whole point of effective pre-decision scrutiny is that they should be at a comparatively, ideally very early stage in their development. And actually, going back to the pre-decision scrutiny of key decisions at formal committee meetings, that I think is too late. I think it slightly misses the point that actually it should be done before a scrutiny meeting takes place.
Jackie, can you elucidate perhaps?
Well, as the author. I completely agree with you, Councillor. It is too late at that stage that if you want to change, all of the thought and the work's gone into something. So it is important to get scrutiny involved at an early stage when plans are being developed. So this is something which the committee chairs asked me to look at as part of the work programming process for this year, to work with all of the scrutiny chairs and scrutiny committees to develop a much more detailed work programme which will be included in the agendas for this committee, and as part of that to identify the key decisions that will be coming forward during the year, so you are involved at a much earlier stage. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
The problem is...
So can I just say my comment would be, I would like that to be amended, but it's ultimately for you, Mary-Therese, to decide. I'm giving a personal preference.
So, I mean, I don't always read those boxes because I've seen them before, if you see what I mean. So, one of the things, Tom has really tried hard to give us a key decision tracker which is better. To me, we're not there yet on key decisions. We need to come in earlier. And the problem, as I understand it, they need to be 28 days on the forward plan. So therefore, they put them on the forward plan before the report is there. And so you cannot really know whether it is an important KD or not. And that has been a problem that I've always had, David. And I think it's something we're trying to get to grips with. We're not there yet.
My response to that is the only way that you can effectively deal with it is by the chairman of the select committee being in regular contact with both the executive director and the lead member, and there may be an overlap. Certainly when I was in families and children's services, it was a very tight thing because there was only one executive director and there were either one or two
because
lead
you've
members.
been on both sides, so you've been...
But you have to. And if you are the lead member, you need to be talking, and if you are the scrutiny chairman, you need to be asking questions as to what things might be coming up that are relevant so that it's on your radar.
And that's another thing that we've been doing, that Jack has been doing, is going to the meetings of the executive directors and trying to find out what important bits of policy are coming on down the line. Jackie, do you want to say something?
Just a couple of things. First of all, I agree with you that scrutiny chairs should be meeting regularly with the lead members, and that's in the guidance for the Centre for Public Scrutiny. It encourages those relationships, because scrutiny very much is about those sort of soft skills, building those relationships, because you're not the decision makers. So it's important that you have those conversations. So I completely agree with that. But also, with regards to the forward plan, decisions have to be on there for a minimum of 28 days. Ideally, they will be on for longer. and corporately officers are being encouraged to put things on much earlier than the 28 days. There has been a big push on that, so I'm not saying every decision is on for a long time, but there is much more work going on to put things on earlier, which will help you as scrutiny to get
And
involved.
sometimes the title or the description of the KD doesn't really tell you very much. You don't understand what it's about because there's no report. So, yes, we are struggling.
Sometimes it is difficult to determine because there can be a lot of jargon which potentially the author doesn't realise because they work in that professionalism, so that's how they speak. But that is another issue around, because it's a public document, so as well as you as councillors wanting to understand it, we have residents who look at the forward plan and want to understand it, so it's important that it's written in a way that people can.
And it's all part of the timing thing, which also came up in Kroll, but I forgot to say it earlier, that they were critical of scrutiny because some of the decisions fell between the scrutiny meetings. And we could up the frequency of meetings, but what really needs to happen is to persuade the executive directors within their work programme. They work to the leadership team's timetable, and to persuade them that they have to factor in scrutiny, so to allow 2 weeks or whatever. And that way, hopefully that won't happen so much. Otherwise, we'll have to just do it by email in between. But it's because scrutiny is kind of like an add-on. It's not considered essential to the process of making a decision. And because of that's why we were criticised in Kroll, because with meetings 2 months apart, the decision might come in the middle of it. And you know, then what do? We could send round emails, but it would be better. It's really trying to sort of up the kudos of scrutiny, that it is actually important, and that everything, you know, the important things, we can't do everything, but the important things do get scrutinised. Sorry, Will.
I totally support what's been said, and I think that one of the things that would be useful is if the executive directors provided a monthly report to through our governance officers to us to say what was coming up, because they all have a work programme, they all have a business stream chart of how they're going to develop these things, and it'd be useful if Jackie had sight of that and passed on to each one of us in our committees what was coming up. The other aspect of things is in the conversation that we should be having with those executive directors and also the lead members, that this subject we've got here is the pre-decision scrutiny of key decisions at the formal committee meeting. Once it comes to the decision, the KDs or whatever, that's quite far down the line in terms of policy development. One of the things is if we have a lively conversation with lead members and directors and senior staff with what's coming up, one of the things that we found in the environment sector, particularly on the carbon zero, is that we can actually point out to them areas of policy that they should be developing, which perhaps they haven't. I referred to the buildings thing. For 10 years I've tried to get buildings on the agenda and failed, and we finally got it on the agenda and we found it's 90% of the job. Well, I think that's excellent part of scrutiny, is probing not only how decisions are being made, but also how policy is being developed forward-looking as well. Because there's, coming out of COVID, there's experience around this table of different communities who have different needs, which maybe are not being heard by the officers and by the lead members. Dare I say it also, there are cases where officers are ahead of lead members in terms of their thinking, and there are other areas where lead members are ahead of their officers in thinking. And scrutiny can perform a useful role in prompting those discussions to move forward further and more thoroughly and engage the public at an early stage of policy development prior to it becoming all fixed in the decision.
Fine. David?
Tracy, this is just a suggestion. You alluded to the fact that there were, 6 or so scrutiny meetings a year, and therefore if you got the timing wrong, it could be very difficult to scrutinise a KD quickly. An idea that Jackie might be able to follow up. If you were to have a short scrutiny meeting on the same day at 6 o'clock as a council meeting, you could actually scrutinise briefly, with that being the only issue on the agenda for, say, half an hour or 20 minutes, depending on how long. But I just leave that with you. If it's not worth taking any further, fine, but I leave it with you.
David, so, but the KDs aren't all taken in full council, are they? Only the big ones?
No, it wouldn't be. You'd have your meeting at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
As a scrutiny meeting, but you wouldn't need to come in for a separate meeting, which people really don't like.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just offer that, Jackie.
I mean, what we've been doing is, because we have regular meetings as chairs, some of them we've looked at the KDs in, not all of them. Tomorrow we won't, but I mean, in a sense, it is a question of the chairs going through this and deciding which ones they want to look at. But, you know, it doesn't always tell you that much. So, you know, I could quite easily miss an important one, is what I'm saying. If someone didn't sort of alert me, I might miss it.
Something?
Yeah.
Or could I ask Jackie, is it possible for select committee chairs to ask for a virtual meeting with about the KDs with the officers or with the lead members?
So you're talking about a briefing rather than a formal committee meeting? Yes, you can do a briefing any way you want, Janet. Yeah.
Actually. I mean, I think it has been quite good. I mean, obviously tomorrow we're meeting to talk about the stock tape, but when we've had our meetings and gone through the KDs, that's been quite good, I think. Sometimes.
Perhaps we should do it more often then.
You mean 2 times a month?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I don't mind. Fine. So, the only thing I have to add is to thank Jackie very much for keeping us on track and all the work that she has put in this year.
Here, here.
And also to thank people monitoring the meeting or doing the technical stuff as well. And yeah, to thank all the chairmen. And yeah, let's hope we can make it better next year. So, thank you everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and good night. Thank you to everyone.